It's spinning, and hopefully any moment now it will tell me that I'm live. Yes, I am live. Greetings, greetings, family. Sister Shanice in the house for another Wisdom Wednesday. Rising up the entire family that's already in the house. I've seen we got some comments in the chat already. So welcome to those of you who have been waiting, and welcome to those of you who are just joining us now. As you can see, my guest Push Kami is already in the house. Absolutely delighted to have him join us today for the Sister Shanice show. And wow, 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 do we have a show lined up for you today? My internet is still a bit challenging, but we're going ahead regardless. So as you come through the door, please do hit me up. Let me know how we're coming across. Let me know where in the world you are watching us from. We would be absolutely delighted to hear from you. Today's show is very important indeed. We have so many mainstream historians out there who tell us that we as Africans have no history. Can you believe it? You know, the Africans who brought civilization to the world, they're saying that we have no history. So today's talk and presentation is going to be so important because we're going to be talking about the importance of African history. Why having African history and a written African history is so important. And we've gone through, many of us have gone through school, college and university in the colonial education system, and we've not heard a fraction about our history and our greatness. And so we have to celebrate today's authors who are out there doing the work. So come through the door, family. Hit us up as you come through the door. We welcome you. So I want to welcome Tiny. Welcome, Tiny S. Good to have you in the house. And you're excited to hear from our learned friend. Yes, we all are. Thank you, Tiny S. Kimani is in the house. Rise up, brother Kimani. Good to have you in the house as well. Zachary is in the house. Rise up, Zachary. Mandele is in the house. Yenge, Mpimpa, Kiambote. Brother Mundele, good to have you in the house. Rising up all the brothers and sisters who are watching us from around the world. KZ, we rise you all up. Family, I've got some great news to share with you, and I hope that you'll be able to join me in my celebration of my excitement. Oh, wow. As you all know, I have been working on a book, King Offa book, A Black King of Anglo-Saxon England. Yes, on the Dr. Winters research course, the Africated research course, we had a presentation by Dr. Marie Charles. And in that presentation, she happened to mention the name King Offa and that he was an Anglo-Saxon king. And she actually showed us some archaeological evidence to prove that to be the case. I was so blown away by this because I've never heard before that there was an Anglo-Saxon king. And so I did the research, not only substantiating all of what she said, but found that there were more than one African kings during Anglo-Saxon times. So I've come up with this book, and I'd love you to join me on Sunday, the 27th of November. But you can book via Amazon right now. Sorry, not Amazon, yeah, if you want to buy the book, but you can register for the launch event via Eventbrite. So go to Eventbrite and just search for A Black King of Anglo-Saxon England book launch, and it will be there. You are invited, family, to share with me and to celebrate with me the long-awaited for King Offa book. But my guest who I have today, family, is no stranger to book writing at all. You know, this man is a very accomplished author, as well as, a lawyer, an attorney. He's done some amazing works, and you are going to be hearing about the works of our guest in a very short while. But before I bring him on to deliver a presentation about the great works that he has been doing. Wow, wow, wow. Phenomenal stuff. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about our guest. Is that okay, Push?
Yeah, that's fantastic. And also greetings to all my friends who have tuned in and all the family all over the world. And thank you so much for inviting me to your fantastic show. Yeah.
Oh, thank you for accepting the invitation. We are honored indeed. So, our brother, Push Kami, was actually born in Ghana, and but he lives and works in South Africa and is a practicing advocate of the High Court of South Africa. His first degree was an honours in English and Spanish, University of Ghana, followed by law degrees in the University of Natal and the Uni of Johannesburg. And writing, he says, was always his first love. And he actually started writing a book from the age of 6. So, family, if you've got children the age of 6 and above, they could be writing their first book too. Wow, wow, wow. So, our guest today, Push, he started writing his book at the age of 6. He won some, or he started winning awards very early on as well, such as the Valco Fund Literary Award for Best Short Story in 1988. He also won the Best Unpublished Collection of Poetry in 1989, the Ghana Association of Writers Editor's Choice Award for Best Poem in 1989, American Library of Poetry Best Historical Book, 100 Great African Kings and Queens, African Authors Awards. I mean, phenomenal list of awards, I must say, my brother. We are so honored to have you present to us and join us on the show today. Let me see if there's a bit more that I can tell you about our brother. And I want to rise up brother Kofi as well for putting us in touch with each other. He's also written a book called Madiba, and this has a special. Oh, Madiba is called to a special meeting of the ancestors. You know what? I'm going to let him tell you about that book, about the second coming of Madiba as well. But my brother, phenomenal, phenomenal works as an author. And I'm sure you are just as phenomenal in the courts of law as well. But in this moment in time, let me go over to you and bring you on the full screen as well, so that our viewers can see and hear from you. Push, please welcome the audience and tell us about yourself, and then take it away, my brother.
Well, thank you so much, Shanice, for this great show. And thank you, as I said, to all my friends and everybody else around the world who have tuned in. Yeah, writing, as you mentioned, was always my first love. All I wanted to do was to write. You know, I had a friend while we were at university who went all the way to Oxford, and when he came back, he brought me the only present that he thought about bringing me was a typewriter, and I never forgot him. Well, well, subsequently, I left the country. I went teaching in Zambia. I was teaching English at advanced level because my first degree was in English. And then subsequently, then I went to South Africa to study law. I was actually accepted for law, quite accidentally. But law and writing are related. It's all about storytelling. When you go to court and you want to win your case, you have to tell a persuasive story, to the judge or jury, to convince that judge or jury to find for your client. So in that sense, they were all related. But when I started practicing law, from there I went to Namibia, came back to South Africa. But your first love never leaves you, So sometime, in the 2000s, then I thought about setting up a publishing company. I thought about writing. And then when I started writing a few books, most of them were fictional. Tofi's Fire Dance, Between Cindy and the Sea. But then I discovered that the most important um, writing that you can do was about African history. Because then I came across all this amazing African history that we
Mhm.
were never taught of in school. When we went to
Mhm.
primary school, high school, nobody told us about the illustrious African history. That actually should be the empowering tool, to propel Africans, into the future. Because we have the most illustrious history and the most powerful history ever. Um,
Mhm.
and that is no secret because Africa is the origin of humanity and the
Mhm.
origin of civilization. So then I then just started writing, looking into researching and then looking into African history. And also not just that, but how best you can present it. Um, and why am I saying that? Because it's often not the story, but how you tell it. It's often not the story, but how you tell it. So then, subsequently, I figured out that the best way to actually present African history was through the central characters, you know, in African history. And these central characters happen to be our leaders or our kings and queens that literally created and drove the civilizations. Right. So then I said about, well, writing, drafting, all these. And then I discovered that there were many of them. I mean, if you look at the history of Kemet, or what we call ancient history alone, ancient Egypt alone, they had so many dynasties, several dynasties. And it was not until the 25th dynasty, that now, they began to have invasions. They began to have invasions first by the Hyksos from Central Asia in 1650 BC. Then you had the Persians, and then the Assyrians, and then the Greeks and the Romans and the Arabs, who with the latter day arrivals in 642 BC, and they have occupied that North Africa until today. But then you do realize that it's the Africa literally gave civilization to the world in this Nile Valley civilization, you know, and even before that. And in thousands of BCs, you will see that a lot of your mathematics, your sciences, your writing, your use of speech, your arts, your spirituality, and your religion all arose from Africa. But often we do not know this, because in the course of slavery and colonization, the 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 enslavers and the colonizers, what they did was to begin to erase African history or distort it or take the credit, for everything that Africans invented. And of course, once you begin to discover African history, then you see that a lot of the things that they wrote, I mean, they set up systems and institutions, you know, to literally indoctrinate us with their version of history. And as Shanice, you rightly mentioned, then they begin to make all these movies and Tarzan movies and all that. And you have a professor of Oxford, called Roper in the
Yeah.
1960s saying, no, Africa had no history. The history of Africa is the history of the white man in Africa. I mean, which is nonsensical. It's absolutely nonsensical. And you think he didn't know about African history? I'm sure he did. Because in the 19th century and 18th century and 17th century, they sent several expeditions into Africa, and there were all these archaeological findings and papyri and Nubia. They went to Nubia, they went down south, and discovered all these amazing evidence of African achievements. You know, which they simply chose to ignore because then they were running a doctrine of white supremacy or domination. And as a result, then they must simply just hide and erase, everything, all African achievements, because then they want to set up a pecking order by which they can dominate and be on top. And then they have to compel Africans to believe that they are inferior so that they'll be at the bottom of the food chain and serve them. So they knew how powerful that African history was. I'll give you another example. Mansa Musa, now everybody knows that Emperor Mansa Musa of Mali was the richest man who ever lived, right? They say that if he was alive today, he would have been worth what? 400 billion US dollars, richer than anybody who ever lived, right? How was that? Was that because there was, you know, an enormous amount of
Oh, has our professor frozen or is it my end? Because,
civilization.
oh,
There was a highly advanced civilization in Mali. Mali was the second in the 14th century, was the second biggest empire in the world after the Mongolian Empire, right? And Mansa Musa literally collapsed the economies of Egypt and various other countries when he made this pilgrimage to Mecca. Because he distributed so much gold that gold became valueless, right? The price of gold came down. And then when he was returning from Mecca, Mansa Musa realized that, of the harm that he had done by freely giving away gold, which at that time it was to them like pebbles. And he borrowed back a lot of the gold from Cairo, to drive up the price again. What does it tell you? It tells you that there was a highly sophisticated civilization in Mali alone, right? And the manuscripts of Timbuktu, which we all now know, and a sophisticated knowledge of economics. So if then we know this history and our children know this history, then nobody can come and tell you that Africans were savages running around naked. Why Mansa Musa went with all these expensive clothing and gold and so much splendor that was documented by the Europeans themselves. How then can they say that Africans was the face of poverty, right? Or that Africans had no knowledge, And then subsequently, one amazing thing, I was reading Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations. And Adam Smith says, oh no, he alludes to the fact that Africans were savages running around. But he wrote his book in Adam Smith, which is a standard text of which all the Western systems and Western economics and Western, civilization is built with respect to economics. At some point he refers to Africans as naked, an African king as naked savages running around, right? But Adam Smith must either was extremely ignorant or had not heard of Mansa Musa. I'm sure they did, but they willfully lie. They know they're lying. They continue to lie. They know we know they are lying, but they continue to lie, right, about it, all in the service of this whole ideology of white supremacy. Well, basically, that just simply touches on some of the issues that if we write our own history, we can highlight to our children. Because if you don't know your history, anybody can fool you. Anybody can tell you anything. And that's what they embarked on the project in the last 400 years, to literally erase and wipe out African history so that we don't know how powerful we are, how powerful our DNA is. And and subsequently, what we've had is during neo-colonialism, they've literally set up systems and institutions of education and curriculum, infiltrated curriculum, that really relegates history as an unimportant subject. So when growing up, nobody wanted to learn history. We didn't think history was important. And what happens here is that when history is not important, you're going to learn something else. And there's also been a process of trying to colonize African history. So you will have the Department of African Studies that sits in Harvard or at the University of Witwatersrand and various places. They discovered that they are funded and controlled by, white institutions, so that even if you employ an African professor of history, they then can do what? Control it and try and tell you what that history should be. So effectively, just a second. Let me just check my battery level.
Okay. So I hope
Okay, fine.
I hope everyone's hearing you fine. I hope my internet is working okay as well. Give us a thumbs up, family, if we're coming out loud and clear. Back over to you, Brother Push. Is your battery in and everything okay your end?
Yes, it just got disconnected a bit. But yeah, so I'll continue here. So, well, this is just a backdrop. But as I mentioned, the deeper you dig, the blacker history becomes. And then you discover that practically everything that we see today arises from the African continent. And it's time to make our children aware of this our powerful history.
Yes, indeed. Long overdue. I mean, that's what's fantastic about the time that we're in. We are uncovering our history for ourselves. I think I lost you for a moment or two, but you're back.
Yes. Okay, so, well, to recap, the fundamental question that faces Africa and Africans and its diaspora is simply, how are we going to win the future? I mean, how will Africa win the future? Malcolm X, put it this way. He says that blacks or Africans all over the world, whether in Britain, you are in China, you are in America, must help Africa as a continent to become powerful. Because if you are black or of African descent anywhere in the world, you're not going to be respected if Africa is not respected. You see, so that is our challenge, the challenge of us and the present generation. And as Sister Shanice, you mentioned, by now, what has become gospel, what is preached by all African intellectuals and great men is that that the only way that Africa will win the future is a deep knowledge of our history, that will guide us, become the compass to our future. And as I've mentioned, if you don't know history, anybody can tell you anything. That's why a professor at Oxford will have the temerity to come and tell us simply, because they try to control our history, to come and tell us Africa had no history. While there are thousands and thousands of years of history and civilization in ancient Egypt, and that civilization arose from Central Africa, the Nile Valley civilization. The Nile Valley starts from Uganda, Burundi, all the way to the Mediterranean, and all along it, you see all the pyramids and the scripts, Meroitic script, the papyrus script. There are more pyramids in the Sudan than are even in what we call Egypt or Kemet. It was all part of one continuous African civilization. And we also know that for almost 800 years, the Moors from North Africa, went to occupy and civilize Southern Europe for 800 years, 711 to 1492, AD, for almost 800 years. They built a lot of the universities in Spain, Cordoba, Salamanca, and all those things. And those were black people, right? And not to even mention the universities, of Jenny Sankore in Mali, and the manuscripts of Timbuktu that date from the 10th century, AD, right? And a lot of Africans, when I speak to them, don't even know that the first universities that are recognized were African. The university, the first continuous university, and then if you Google it, the Guinness World Records will tell you The
Mm-hmm.
first university, continuing university, recognized university, was in what we now call Morocco. It was founded by an African woman, right? Under
Wow.
Islamic influences. And that university was University of Al Qarawiyyin, Qarawiyyin, in Fez, in what is now called Morocco. But it was founded by Black people. And it was in 859 AD. The first European university was 229 years later, in Bologna in Italy, 1088 AD, right? The second oldest university, according to this Guinness Book of Records, the white people themselves say it, we don't say it, right? Was Al Azhar in what is now Egypt, 970 AD. Your Oxfords and your Harvards are latter day saints. They came up later. And all of them arose in the medieval period when Africans were civilizing Europe. Then they got to know about universities. But now what we have African children growing up thinking that all knowledge and education comes from the Western world or white world, which is ridiculous. Because now, even in this age of information, all that information is at the touch of your button. Google, you can Google that information, is all there. All the ancient African kingdoms and empires are there. You have a genealogy of all the ancient, African, monarchies, that literally transformed the world. And once we get together and present this history and let it seep through our educational systems and curriculum from grade 1, in a generation, this will become a powerful motivating force, an inspirational force that will literally drive a revolution in Africa, in that the children will have the self-confidence and self-esteem to say, look, this is our DNA. We built the pyramids. We built all the pyramid of Giza that now even the white world are still today unable to figure out. That if we go back to thousands of years BC, we have all these evidence of mathematical artifacts that began in Africa, like the Bombo bones, that was found in the Bombo Madis near the border of Swaziland and Africa. And we have the Shango bone in the Congo. Those were the first mathematical artifacts, that have ever been discovered. Writing began in Africa. If you Google it, the history of writing, there were African writings that dated 5,000 BC in Sibidi, in West Africa. You got a Meroitic script in Nubia. You got Ge'ez in Ethiopia. Of course, you got the hieroglyphs. Writing originated in Africa. But then you would find white people running around saying, "Oh, but Africa had no writing." Had no writing. And then you find Africans agreeing, because of the lack of knowledge of history. And imagine if we African parents agree to these things, we tell our children, and then our children, where will they find the self-esteem to say, oh, we actually the origins of civilization, the origins of writing, the origins of mathematics, the origins of science, the origins of spirituality and religion, and all that has made the world what it is today. It becomes a powerful force that will say that, look, Africans, we can do anything. We magical. We've got the big and better brains. We can transform the world. We can do anything. Black excellence is not a myth, because our ancestors, did the same and civilized the world. So in fact, that is the challenge, that we face today. But it's not that the African history has not been there, because if you research, you discover that several books have been written. There's been Chancellor Williams, The Destruction of Black Civilization. There's been Sheikh Anta Diop, The African Origins of Civilization, Myth or Reality. You got Van Settima, he came before Columbus, and others. C.L. James, who talks about stolen legacies. All of them are there, and today with the modern world, you can find them. You Google them on you go to Amazon, you search, all these books are there. You've got Wallace Badge, who writes Egyptian Book of the Dead, from papyrus that they discovered in ancient, Egypt. The Egyptian Book of the Dead, which in actual fact should be the Egyptian Book of the Coming Forth by Day, or the Egyptian Book of the Great Awakening, right? But obviously, while his badge went in there, the British Museum sent him, and he literally stole some papyrus and then took it back and translated and transliterated them. And then the wives got to know about a lot of amazing things that Africans have done, and then they call it the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which scares Africans, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. But the correct the correct translation then should be the Egyptian Book of the Great Awakening. And when you actually read these books, you discover that all the stories that you find in the Bible, in the Quran, or everywhere, a lot of them, are taken from books that preceded all these 1,500 years before them, right? And I also like to tell the story of Amen, right? Amen was the supreme being in ancient African Egypt, 2,000 years before Christ, right? If you go to, and he was known as Amun Ra or Amon Ra or Amon or Amen. Those are all variations of the name, just like Jesus would have Yahushua or Christ or whatever. Amen, the temples of Amen. Amen was the central, supreme character in that Nile Valley for about 3,000 years, and it was worshipped. And if you go to the Nile Valley today, in the temples that all the African pharaohs built, massive temples, the Hypostyle Temple at Karnak can fit 5 European cathedrals, right? The concept of churches and temples are to be found all along the African Nile Valley. And all of them, a lot of them were built to honor the supreme being, Amen. Amen, right? And if you go there today, you look them, there are all the images of Amen in the temples. And he's a black man, who has literally been supplanted. But if you go through it, you find more than 42 references to Amen, even in the Christian Bible. Amen actually ends the Bible. And if you read your Bible properly, a lot of Africans don't, simply carry it to church for some pastor to tell them what is in it. You look at Revelations chapter 3, verse 14, it will tell you that, to the Laodiceans and to Amen, the beginning of the creation of God. That Amen is a creation of God. I mean, all there you see references. If you research, Amen is mentioned and ends the praise of all your major religions, right? Be it Christian, or Muslims, Buddhism, they all say Amen. And that Amen was a black person, right? And his images are there in the Nile valleys. But obviously, you live in Africa and then you want to go on holiday. You want to go to Paris. You want to go to London. But the white people go to Nubia, they go to Egypt, and they know, and they run around the place. But we are not spending money. We want to go and watch the Eiffel Tower. While the complexity of the pyramids and all this, the civilization in Africa, we don't even explore it, So these are all issues, that Africans, we literally, it's our duty as the present generation, and shows like the wonderful Shanice show to highlight all these things, to say that there's something, big that we are missing that can literally make us the superpowers of this world, because it's in our DNA. And why it is so important to be able to capture all these and, seep it through, control our own educational system and educate our children on how powerful they are and how powerful, they will become. And that is the way that we will get back to our former glory and win the future. 400 years of history of disruption and distortions and falsifications. It's not our history. if you look at it within the light of even that, even our Moors, the white people, the black people, the black Moors were there for 800 years, civilizing Europe. So what is 400 years? It's just a drop in history, and it will pass. And once it passes, we are going to return to our glory. As such, and as I did mention, it's not like all this history is not there. UNESCO, um, from 1970 to present, put together eminent historians to write Africa's history, and we've got 9 volumes of them up to that covers various areas in African history, and all these 9 volumes are there. They're online. If you go to a UNESCO website, you can do what? Download them for free. I actually also took them and then put them on my website, realafricanbooks.co.za. You can literally download them. But do Africans reading this? The African politicians reading this illustrious history? The Africans intellectuals reading this history? The African educators, do they even read it? And I'm surprised when I go around and then I talk to people who say, oh, no, we are Pan-Africanists, we are professors, and all those things. And you ask them simply, look, do you know where the first university in the world, is, continuous, even according to the Guinness Book record, and they don't know it. Have you heard of the manuscripts of Timbuktu? Have you heard of the Lebombo bone? They themselves don't know it, right? But what we are saying is that all the history has been chronicled even by UNESCO in 9 big volumes. So then, back to what I'm saying. What I say is that Black education without Black history is no education. It is no education. Marcus Garvey, your countryman. Shanice, you originally from Jamaica, right? He's been one of the greatest Africans, Black people of all time, right? I mean, his Negro Improvement Unit, was phenomenal. The organization behind it. He said that the people without the knowledge of their past history, origins, and culture is like a tree without roots. That tree cannot survive. And if we say that education without Black history is no education, it must be history that is written by ourselves, because there's a popular saying that the tale of the hunt, um, when you talk about the tale of the hunt, if it's written by the hunter, it will glorify the hunter, but not the lion. And that's what they do. When the hunter goes there, he's got his own agenda. I've been to court and I've defended several cases in the High Court. All the people, all the criminals who come there, they plead not guilty. Rarely do they plead guilty. That's why we are in the business. In business, it's the same thing. If you allow the criminal to tell the story, you make it nice. You didn't do it. You're just walking around by the side of the road and you was arrested for nothing. By the police. Sometimes we suspect that they're not telling the truth, but it's our job to defend them. Same thing. If you have a group of people who have organized, in Europe to come and invade and plunder and destroy you, you don't expect them that they will write the story to say that they came to run down, rape, and rob you. They're not going to do that. They will say, oh, no, we came here, you were in trouble, and we came to civilize you. Because you're not telling your own story. It's the same thing. They're not going to admit their crimes. They're not going to do that. That what we did was wrong. We came and we simply wanted your resources. So we came and then we brought guns to come and kill you and then take your place and occupy your place and continue to oppress you. They're not going to say that. So that's why then we must write our own story. We must write our own story. And I also illustrate this, by saying that who in his right mind would go to a medical doctor who does not have his medical history, right, to properly be cured of your illness, you must go to the doctor who has your medical records or your medical history. But unfortunately, in Africa and in our educational system, we don't realize that there is something is really wrong there if you don't do that. And as a further illustration, nobody must ever hire a lawyer who does not know what we call case law, right? Case law is history. It's history of your particular problem that the lawyer knows, and he can quote from the wisdom of all the previous judges, right, who have handled similar cases. And some of them date from 1937. It dates from decades back. But a lawyer who knows your applicable case law or your case history is able to track how that matter was decided, the legal principles that were applied, and how it relates to your legal problem. And as a result, is able to persuade a judge or a jury to say, fine for my client. All of it is history. All of it is simply what? History. And essentially, that is what I'm saying, that is so fundamental, to our growth, our education systems, and how we're going to win the future. Now, everybody looks surprised, when they watch the historical fiction, The Woman King. Shanice, I hope you've seen it. Hello. Hello.
Sorry, I'm on mute. I put myself on mute because my computer was making up too much noise. Yeah.
I was watching. After several years now, The Woman King comes out, the movie. Yesterday, I went to watch the Black Panther 2, right? Which is literally fiction, but, it's empowering. But we watched The Woman King about King Gezu and the Dahomey Kingdom. And a lot of people are surprised, something that Africans look and they don't even know that. This is what I'm saying. I was asking whether you watched it. You watched it yet? The Woman King. It's an amazing movie. But, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I had myself on mute. No, I've not been to see The Woman King. Yes. I read a bit about it beforehand and decided that I didn't want to watch a film if it was going to be about, us slaughtering each other, which I gather it was mainly about from the beginning of the film almost through to the end. And I just didn't like the sound of that. So no, I didn't go and see it. There's so many books out there that I find so empowering, and so I can get my inspiration, from reading those books. And I noticed that even in one of your books, I'm sure you're going to go on to talk about, some of the queens that you have written about. Real African queens that existed in history. We don't need the made up kings, the made up queens at all. So no, I didn't go and watch it, and I know some people went and watched it and thought it was absolutely fantastic, and it was empowering for them, but I don't think it was empowering for our men, But anyway, I've yet to do a show and have people who've seen it who think it was great, and those who've seen it who thought otherwise. But personally, no, I didn't go.
Yeah.
What was your thoughts about it?
My thoughts about it is simply this: it's historical fiction, but then it makes us want to look at African history because it's based on fact, right? And often, I know when I go to court, you don't listen to what anybody says. You go and look for the evidence, right? So I like to see it with my own eyes, and form my own opinion.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, it literally then leads you to be able to, relate to the history of the Dahomey Kingdom, and that King Gezo was a real king. So then you are able to read further on King Gezo and the Dahomey Kingdom and the slave trade and all these things, and you are able to Google or go and look for a book on Amazon about the Dahomey Kingdom. What the film does is that then it leads you to explore African history. So you can basically sidestep the dramatization or the parts of the script. But what then it shows, is that Africans were not savages there at the time of the arrival of the Europeans. They engaged in trade, and you can take a lot of positive aspects, from the movie. So literally, it's about intellectual curiosity. Going to see it with your own eyes, right? Apart from what other people say, me, I don't care about what other people. I want to see it with my own eyes and be able to, literally, research further, about it. So, well, that was my takeaway.
I hear you on that. I mean, but do we really need to see gory movies about ourselves to be inspired to do further research into our history? Do we really need, a lesbian couple to write a movie about us to be inspired? Someone said very earlier in the chat as well that, we need to be reading books that have been written by us for us. And equally, I think we need to be watching movies that have been produced and directed and written by us for us. Because, you watch these movies and it's trauma on top of trauma some of the time. Or, they're including their subliminal messages and their peculiar lifestyles. And do you know what I'm saying? So
yeah, no, I understand. There's no right
yeah,
or wrong. And
yeah. Sorry.
Yeah,
I
there's no
hear
right
you.
or wrong.
I hear you on
Those
that.
who
Yeah.
say I don't want to see it, it's fine. Those who also go to see it may be critical. But for me, I want to see it because I just wanted to see. I didn't want to hear it
Firsthand.
from
But you've got in your book,
with
haven't
my own
you?
eyes,
Queen
not
Nzinga.
from what other people say.
You've got.
And then
I was going to say you've
and
got
then
Queen
from there,
Nzinga of Matamba in your book, who you write about, who is a real queen who said, "You must call me king."
yeah,
So
that is so.
yeah, you tell us about.
African history is so rich, it's so vast, right? And you can find several of it everywhere. So and so it's from that perspective that all of African history, is important. No, you're right. Lest I digress, movies are
Let's
often fictionalized.
Yeah, and I mean,
but let's
I understand that there
yeah.
are loads of fiction movies out there, and we shouldn't get too sensitive. And it does, maybe open curiosity for people to go and do further research. But I think I'm a bit sensitive because there are so few films out there that have a constructive narrative about us
Right.
as a people. And so, it's always like a case of yet another film that is, just talking about enslavement and slavery, and as if we never had a history outside of slavery, and coming yet again with another message that is being told to us by those who don't have our interests at heart. Personally, we don't have time for this. We
All
don't have
right.
no time for this. But
Yeah,
it's all
no,
good.
understand.
It's, I don't have a problem with people who want to go and see. Maybe one day I'll have an open session on my show, and those who did go and see it, and those who didn't go and see it, they can just jump on and, they can tell me if I missed a great movie or if I was right not to go and see it, But yeah, I didn't need them. These people to be telling me anything about my history. They had their opportunity. I've spent whole heap of years in their school, colleges, and university. They could have been taking some of the artifacts out of the basements of their university at their university basements and sharing my history with me, but they choose to hide it away, in their basements, in their museums, in their curiosity closets, and then have the cheek to say that we don't have a history outside of slavery, as you were saying earlier. But then go with them to yeah, so
Yeah.
anyway, I said this with Jamaica,
Uh,
by the way. Yeah.
yeah, no,
So
yeah, I hear you. Because some of it that's getting emotional. You know.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so as I did mention, currently the problems we face is our curriculum. You know, we Africans must take control, of our history and our narratives. You know, um, we must write our own history books. And before I digressed, I was talking about all these tomes of books that are written by the UNESCO, by eminent professors, and nobody reads it. Then I asked myself, why do nobody people don't read, actually research and read the history? And I think that it's not the story, but it's how it's told. It's often not the story, but how it's told. Um, we must tell our own story, and we must present it in such a way, that it becomes attractive. So a lot of the history is there, but how do we make it interesting? How do we make it easy to read? How do we make it attractive? Um, how do we make it such that people will want to read them, right? And basically, that's what a number of years ago, occupied my mind and decided that, look, let me put together, try and capture a panoramic view of African history, um, by presenting it with the central characters in the panoply of African history throughout the years from 4000 BC to the present. It was literally about the selection of some of those powerful and illustrious characters that created and created and drove civilizations, you know. And then to write it in such a way, it's not a biography, but to write it in such a way that it becomes interesting, and then people will want to read them. And that's what I set about doing. And then once that happens, and then you have it in schools, then the children will want to read them, because then it's empowering, it's uplifting, and there are interesting stories here with quotes, with illustrations, and with anecdotes. And then they can relate to those stories. If you give them Sheikh Anta Diop's Origin of Civilization, they will read one chapter, right? Even adults would read one chapter, because books are difficult to read. People find it difficult to read books. And these days, you've got a lot of diversions. You can watch TikTok, you can go to Facebook, you can go to Twitter. You got several channels, 200 or 500 channels on TV. So then people, those who like to read books are people who are committed to reading books or buying books, right? And more so history, right? Yes, they might read novels or romance novels or whatever, but now it comes to history. If you present it such that it's unattractive, or it's difficult, it's difficult to read. I mean, you don't read one chapter and then you put it down. So that's what then we set out to do, to build, real African books and real African publishers, to write and build these books that are easy read, that are well illustrated, and that are interesting to read. And I've realized that more recently, Netflix, has adopted that approach. I mean, we did our first manuscript somewhere up in 2007, but Netflix, when you check on Netflix, they have a history documentary on the Roman Empire. And how do they go about presenting it? They are recent. They present it by Julius Caesar, the story of Julius Caesar, right? But in the story of Julius Caesar, they tell the history of Rome. Then from there, then they move on to Augustus Caesar, who is said to be the founder of Rome. And then you have Caligula, and you have Marcus Aurelius. And through that, then they tell the story. You begin to know the history of Rome, built around the central figures. We Real African Books, we came up with 100 great African kings and queens. We first published the manuscripts were already there, but I was running around the courthouse trying to make some money. But the first one that we did was 100 Great African Kings and Queens, Volume 1, right? And then it was a selection of all these powerful figures who, in essence, with children, they become role models, for children as well. And, I thought about doing the selection from every region in Africa. So you get from Southern Africa, you get from Central Africa, you get from East Africa, you get from West Africa, and you get from North Africa. It's a selection of all of them. And in so doing, then once you read the stories and you find them interesting, you begin to learn a lot, of African history. Right.
I'll see if I can share screen so I can show the viewers the front cover, etc. of your works. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
But do carry on in the meantime.
All right. So we did the first one. It was quite experimental. And initially, we thought about writing it for school-going people. We did this 100 Great African Kings and Queens in 2012, but it was more for school-going, children. And I was lucky to have got, to get a wonderful illustrator. Hello.
It would help if I took mute off. You were showing a different front cover to the one I have here, but I think we're talking about the same book. Is this okay?
Okay, this is volume 2 of the revised edition of 100 Great African Kings and Queens, right? And that's the e-book version. We have volume 2, but I'll come to volume 2 shortly. Yeah, that's volume 2.
Okay, let me try and find volume 1 in the meantime.
Yes. And the image that you see there is of a great South African queen called Mantatisi, who led his group, his people, in times of crisis, across the region, through conquest, through wars, led wars, which was a real warrior queen, and then finally settled in the Orange Free State in Southern Africa, with his people, and triumphed. It was led by an African woman, a warrior queen, a woman king. Who did that? But the interesting thing is that you go around and you ask people in South Africa, have you heard of Mantatisi? They haven't. Same thing. You find that same thing in various African countries. You ask them, have you heard of some of the most prominent warriors or kings and queens of their history? None of them haven't heard about them. So that is the problem with our educational system. Mantatisi was very powerful, right? But to come back to our first edition was 100 Great African Kings and Queens. We did this volume 1, and volume the whole, why we call it 100 Great African Kings and Queens. I had a fantastic illustrator from Zimbabwe, right? And why we call it 100 Great African Kings and Queens was that I figured out that if we are able to do 100 of them from 4000 BC to the present, we are able to capture a significant portion of African history built around these personalities. So then volume 1 will easy read, well illustrated, interesting stories. Then, covers 10 of them, with illustrations and images, covers 10 of them. Then volume 2 also, that's What you are sharing on the screen is the revised edition of volume 1. I mean, you can see I revised that original one, that is this one, and made it more in depth. Made it more in depth, and also changed the cover to place Khufu, the builder of the pyramid, in front of the pyramids. And that is a very powerful image, because throughout history, they tried to literally look. Our minister will steal our history to try and make it seem that those pyramids were built by some aliens or built by some other people. But the truth of the matter is that it was built by Africans from Central Africa. That's why you see even more pyramids in the Sudan than in Egypt. It was part of one continuous civilization. So then I placed Khufu at the center, and he's a black person. And when I post it on Facebook, people from the Arabs, from North Africa, get very mad, because then they try to make it seem that, oh no, now this is our civilization. But they only arrived there with the rise of Islam and the conquest, the Islamic conquest of North Africa in 642 AD, and they've remained there ever since. And now what's happening is that they're making money out of African heritage. So we must reclaim our history. We must reclaim what is ours, and we should be unapologetic about it. We should be unapologetic apologetic about it.
Mm-hmm.
So then, we did volume 1, and the whole idea is to do 10 volumes, because if you approach history that way, there are not huge volumes of books that will put people away, that will discourage people to read. You illustrate them, you make it easy to read, but you pack it with facts. You pack it with facts, and you make it episodic, just like you watch a Netflix show and it's in episodes, so they're easy to read. So if you take a book like that, and first you write a history fact-filled with illustrations of Hannibal, you can simply read Hannibal in a very short time and be done with it. And next time you are reading about Makeda, the Queen of Sheba, and the illustrious kingdom of Aksum in Ethiopia. If you don't tell that story, they will tell you that the Queen of Sheba was a white person, was a white person. And that's why we African children have been made to believe for decades, right? But that Queen of Sheba, who is traced to the Jewish king Solomon, was an African queen, right? But then it gets appropriated, You discover that Hannibal was a black general, right? And Hannibal, up to today, is known, is respected. I mean, the white people today are scared of Hannibal, because Hannibal from North Africa crossed the Mediterranean Sea, conquered Spain, and then went over the Swiss Alps, right? At that time, they thought it was impossible with his war elephants, 37 war elephants, and recruited, recruited soldiers along the way, and then descended upon the Roman Empire and crushed them in so many victories that even today in Europe, when they say, "Oh, Hannibal antipotas, Hannibal is at the door," they use it to frighten children. The Hannibal is at the door. Today, Hannibal is known as the father of military strategy. I have an illustration of Hannibal here, as you can see him illustrated with his war elephants. And the interesting thing about this, is that Hannibal, is known to have fought the bloodiest battle in history. At the Battle of Cannae, he killed 70,000 Romans in one day. In one day, it's thought to be the bloodiest battle in history. And the military strategy that he used to crush the Romans has been talked about until today. But another way that we make this 100 great African kings and queens interesting is that when we start the story, it comes with a quote, right? The quotes at the beginning, right? And they are inspirational quotes. So one of my favorite quotes, Hannibal is one of my favorites, right? Because there has but Hannibal, why do you want to destroy the Romans? And his response was, but I do not wish to destroy the Romans. I am only contesting for glory and empire. So if the Romans died, they're just collateral. I am only contesting for glory and empire. Um, the lesson that we learn here is simply this: that Africans, today, if we take inspiration from Hannibal, we should be fearless. One, and then secondly, in being fearless, we must contest for glory and empire. We must not sit around and say, oh, there's TikTok and there's Facebook, so we will just consume. We cannot contest these things because our DNA shows that we are the origin of technology and mathematics and civilization, and all the mathematical calculations that were used to build the pyramid of Giza, such that it is so perfect, that Europeans have not been able to figure that out today. If our children know that, then they will be out there contesting for glory and empire. We must be able to contest your Zuckerbergs, your Elon Musk. We must be able to your Jeff Bezos. We must be able to contest them. And if we know that we are descendants of great people like Hannibal, they will be out there contesting for glory and empire. They will be able to tell us that these people are some big heroes, that they are some super gods. So that's the approach that we adopt in making this interesting. I've already spoken about a character like Mansa Musa, who was the richest person who ever lived, and all the wealth of the Mali Empire and the manuscripts of Timbuktu and all the universities that he built. So nobody can come and tell you that the white man is the origin of education, because they learned all of that from us, right? And to talk about the queens, they were powerful queens. You mentioned Nzinga, and I'm sure it must be among your favorites. Isn't it, Shanice? Nzinga fought and defeated the Portuguese enslavers, who went along the coast to take slaves to Brazil. He fought them in several battles and defeated them in so many battles, such that the Portuguese got tired, and they literally did what? After that, they accepted his peace treaties. And he never lost, until into the ripe age of 81. He died a peaceful death and then handed over. And Zenga was phenomenal. He led the men into battle and said, "You must call me king." He said, "You must call me king." And then we have illustrations like that. I'm showing the color illustrations from the first edition. Nzinga of Matamba. His history is hugely inspirational. It shows that Africans were not just some sitting ducks, right? That somehow they came and then they simply just took us. The Europeans suffered heavy defeats, right? So throughout this, we have volume 1, and this is a revised edition, and it's very in-depth. It gives much more detail from the experience of the first edition that we did, volume 1, and it's literally the same stories, but it's expanded with more images, and it's got lots of references at the back of books that you can read. You can do further reading on. It's got references at the back. It's got a genealogy of all the African kings in ancient Egypt or Kemet, up to when the Romans and the Greeks literally came to rule Egypt, in 30 BC. That is more in depth, and that I recommend. And we finished with the volume 1, and we've also done the volume 2 of 100 Great African Kings and Queens. So we have 80 more of them to go, right? Or 8 volumes. But you discover that even if you go to the history of the kings and queens of Ethiopia or Egypt alone, there's several of them. You can run into 500 or 1,000 of them. And if you capture their history, you capture the history of that civilization, and you discover that there's so much more of African history that we don't know. But in essence, I thought, look, 100 will give a panoramic view and to also just stimulate people to delve much into what African history, or what I call it, is literally the history of the world, right? Because Africa is where, mankind, originated. The African woman is the origin of every human being that you see on earth today. And that civilization arose, from Africa. But often we don't know it because then, they've colonized us, they've seized the education system, they've seized the curriculum, and they fed us with a curriculum that doesn't empower us. That makes us, puts us at the bottom of the food chain. That makes us think that somehow the white man brought everything that we see around us. But once you delve into it, you discover that, it's a massive lie, right? But um, I take inspiration from Chinua Achebe, that the great writer Chinua Achebe. And every time I remember that. He says, look, if you don't like someone's story, tell your own. Right? If you don't like someone's story, tell your own. Um, it gets disheartening when you often hear, oh, but they didn't teach us this, they didn't tell us this. Who are you waiting to tell you? Somebody who comes with his own agenda, he's not going to tell you what you need to know to liberate yourself, to come and overthrow him. He won't do that. The thief who wants to come into your house and collect your property, he's not going to come and tell him that, hey, I'm here to rob you. Right? You come and say, I'm a very nice person. I'm so thirsty, can I have some water? Right? And then rob you anyway. Right? And after he's robbed you, he's not going to go and then tell people that I robbed him. He said this guy was a massive drug dealer, and then I went in there to go and find out what he was doing, and then he responded and tried to fight me. He tried to kill me, so I had to do something and save all of you, for your children from drugs. That is what has literally happened with we Africans. And like you mentioned, yeah, I talked about Nzenga. There were various others. There's the story of Cleopatra, right? Who famously declared that I am the Nile. But what people often don't even know, that there's a lot of controversy as to his origins. Obviously, his father was Ptolemy, right, and of Greek origin, yes, but nobody knows who his mother was. And a bit of research will tell you that the mother was Nubian, was black. You can Google and find out who was Cleopatra's mother. They don't know, right? And often, a lot of the murals and statues that you see in Europe portrays her as a black with braids, right? And the evidence that supports even the fact that Cleopatra was half black, or if you use the one drop rule, black, was that he was the only person in that whole family that actually spoke the original Egyptian language, or Kemet's language, fluently. Apart from all the languages, he could actually speak 9 languages. But the only one who could speak the original, yeah, that's correct. That's one of the fantastic illustrations, that is presented. That was done by my great illustrator. That is it. His origin, the evidence shows that his origin was Nubian. His father must have been Greek, but his origin was Nubian. And there is great evidence that shows that he wasn't even black. But if you allow somebody to tell you the story, you get a whole different things. But as I mentioned, there are a lot of other artifacts and statues in Europe that shows that he wasn't your lily white woman. But she was appropriated. He was just simply appropriated. And to talk about other great women, queens. or, or, or if I want to tell you about the movie you don't like, the other women kings, it should be the queens, right? You have courageous women like Yaa Santua, right? who of Ghana, who when the King Prempeh had been taken to Seychelles, and the men were afraid to go and fight the British, he rallied them and gave a speech. And he says that, hey, if you, the men, will not go for it, then we, the women, will, right? And we, the women, will. And then with that, he gave a speech. And then what did he do? He fired a shot. He took a gun and fired a shot, right? And he said, look, you people, you men can stay at home. We women are going to fight the British, until the last of us falls on the battlefield. So then what happens? The men were then ashamed, and now they decided to go and fight. He said, look, if it was in the days of our great kings, no British governor would have come here to come and talk to our chiefs like the British governor, Sir Hodgson, did today, right? He had self-respect, he had pride, Yasantua. And then led the men into battle, the late siege on the British fort in Kumasi, until they brought in reinforcements, to break that siege. And was arrested and then taken to the Seychelles also. But the lessons, we learned a lot of lessons from these things. It's not just simply storytelling. There are lots of lessons to be learned there. And one of what you gather is that it's not that simply the British just came in and, defeated the Ashantis. They fought 5 wars that lasted 100 years to try and subdue the Ashantis, who were the dominant force, in that region. And then because the Ashantis had so much gold, the British, eyed them, right? Eyed, their wealth, and simply just wanted to come and take their stuff, right? You learn all these stories from the telling of the story of Yasantua. And in that 100-year war, it was almost a stalemate. I mean, the Ashantis won the first one. The second one was a stalemate. Literally the Ashanti almost won the second one. The third one, then they sent in forces, say Worsley, say Garnet Worsley and his troops. The Ashantis called the Sagrenti War. And in 1873, then they came again, and then this time they defeated the Ashantis. And they came in 1894. Then the Yasantua's war was fought in 1900. It was war over 100 years, and they kept coming as long as there was something there that they could take, right? That's the lesson that you learn, one. And you also learn the lesson that even if right now, 50 years later or some years later, we gained our independence, it doesn't mean that they will not come back, right? Because they were there for 100 years. Every time when they were defeated, they went and they regrouped and they kept coming, until they smashed the Ashanti kingdom and colonized it, So those are lessons that you learn. And beyond that, it is not like it ended in the eventual defeat of Africans, because 60 years later, we fought back and we also regained our independence, right? But what you also learn is that we must also learn not to just be defensive. We must learn to be offensive, right? If we sit around and wait for people to do things to us, we're not going to prosper. We must also be able to build military capacities to be able to also, when it becomes necessary, to come and invade you if it becomes necessary. It can't always be on the defensive. I don't know of any team that wins the World Cup by simply sitting back, soccer World Cup by sitting back and waiting for people to keep attacking him, the team. You must learn offense. Even while you are defending, you must learn to also go on the offense and score goals. In the future, we also have to take the examples of the Moors. If it becomes necessary to go to Europe and go and civilize them, we must build the military capacity to be able to do that, right? And there are also further lessons that you learn from the Yasantua story. That apart from the fact that there was this 100-year war, you discover that during all these things, we all hear about divide and rule. Yes. When the British force comes, first they'll come in, and then they look at the dominant force of where your resources are, and then they begin to align with your traditional enemies, right? So the British will come in, look at who your traditional enemies are, then they'll give guns and support the fancies or the dangerous, and because they study and then they see that these are your traditional enemies, so they're able to align you to come and then get them, get them on their side, and then come and defeat you and take your stuff, take your gold. And that's what they literally did all the time. When they fought the Ashantis, they went with the fancies, right? Um, a 3,000 member force of the fancies. And the story that I always like to tell also from this story is the first war is called the Battle of Nsamanko in 1824, right? In which the Ashanti forces destroyed the British. They killed all of them, together with their Fanti, allies, right? Often the story has been like, oh, almost the British won. But if you read African history properly, you discover that even in the 19th century, during the era of all this colonization, they suffered several defeats, not only among the Ashantis, in various parts of Africa, in South Africa, they suffered several defeats with the King Sekukuni. King Sekukuni defeated the British 3 times. He defeated the Boers 3 times. They brought in the biggest military force in Europe, and they brought it in to put an end to the Sekukuni menace. Sekukuni defeated them. But no, you don't hear in South Africa anybody talk about Sekukuni, right? Who defeated the Dutch and the British 6 times, right? Yes, what you hear about is Shaka Zulu, because the apartheid government made a movie about him. But then if you delve into history, you discover that Shaka never even fought any European opposition. He never did. It was more about building a nation and defeating, smashing and defeating the smaller African tribes to incorporate them to the Zulu nation. Never did. In fact, in actual fact, you find a lot of books written by the British about Shaka. But Shaka, because Shaka was nice to them, and at the end of the day, he even gave them land in Natal, right? Port Natal. And it was nice with the British. But you never hear any white person write about Sekukuni because he embarrassed them, right? And we Africans sit around and say, hey, Shaka Zulu was the powerful man. It's because we haven't, narrated our history properly. But coming back to, I digress. Sekukuni is covered in volume 2 of 100 Great African Kings and Queens. The volume 2. And yeah, coming back to one more lesson, I like to tell the story of the Battle of Nsamanko in 1824. They wanted to go and smash the Ashantis. So when Ashantis tried to sue for peace, the British did not listen. They wanted to go and kick the Ashantis hard. So they mobilized the traditional enemies, and then Sir McCarthy, he was the British governor in Sierra Leone, and later, in Ghana, in the southern part of Ghana, took the troops to go and smash the Ashantis, right? And then when they went, they met a large Ashanti force at the river called Pra, and they started to play "God Save the King." This is "God Save the Queen," and thought that was how I'm going to convince the Ashantis to give up. But then they saw that things were not going to go well when the crescendo of the drums kept beating loudly. And before they realized, the Ashantis had crossed the river and they were upon them. All of them were simply just slaughtered. And before that Battle of Nsamanko, the Ashanti king, Osetutu Kwajo, had warned Sir McCarthy that, hey, if you dare attack us, I will use your skull as a drinking cup and your jawbones to beat my drums. He warned the British governor. The British governor did not listen. Well, the long and short was it that his forces were thoroughly defeated, and they took his head off, and took it to Kumasi. Up to now, they never found the skull of Sir McCarthy, but they warned him that he was going to use the skull as a drinking cup. Well, an anecdote goes around that during festivals, I don't know how true that is, the Ashanti kings, pass around the skull and then drink palm wine. They drink their palm wine from it, but that's just an anecdote. But that was it. I mean, these are all, in effect, what I'm trying to say is that these are all stories of African victories that will inspire African children that are not told, because somebody controls the narrative and controls the telling of the story. And we are not writing our own stories, to highlight, our victories. And there's also one important economic lesson that you learn from Yas Antoine's story in volume 1 of 100 Great African Kings and Queens. During a lot of these encounters, British merchants, were actually selling arms to both sides. They were selling arms to the British. They were selling arms to the Ashantis. But obviously they would give the inferior arms to the Ashantis. And the British side would get the superior arms. But they were happy to do business. It was business as usual, right? From those lessons, you discover that the economic interest trumps everything, right? And even today they do that. If you want to get arms and go and kill yourself, they'll sell it to both sides. If it's in Ethiopia, they will sell it to the Tigrayans, and they will sell it to the Ethiopian government, right? And if they like you better, they'll give you the superior arms. Well, basically, this is just an illustration of some of the powerful lessons that we learn in history, such that we don't repeat it, so that we know that it is not final, that they will not be coming back. And Kwame Nkrumah has said that in his book, that angered the U.S. government and the U.S. president, at that time, Lyndon Johnson. There's his book there on neocolonialism, right? New colonialism, or new forms of colonialism, that they literally have taken control of our economies, our education systems, our judicial systems, all our systems and institutions, and literally use it to serve their own interest. And if you look at that, you see that the institutions are international criminal courts, right, that they set up, and they want Africans to sign onto it. But they're never going to go and arrest George Bush or Tony Blair, right, for Iraq, right? They use it to do what? Come and arrest African leaders, right? That they don't like, And then we begin to understand this when we read history and we read, all the lessons that, we learn for it. And it becomes more powerful if we, from grade 1, we begin to adapt all these stories. And that's what we've done. We've adapted them for younger age groups. This is like in the form of, for younger age groups, I have The Glory of African Kings and Queens, with different covers like this for 8 to 12. It's an adaptation of all the other books. And then we have Kings and Queens of Africa. This is in poetry. I started my writing life by writing poetry. At some point, I thought I could make a living out of writing poetry. Then I discovered it was just a big illusion. So I had to go and study law. But what I'm saying here is that then you have the poetry version, which then I expected that it will be read out to children from 4 to 6 years old. And then, with that, all that history, Africans become very powerful. Let me just quickly touch on others. There were several other powerful ones. Apart from Khufu, the builder of the pyramids, we have Hatshepsut. He was one of the greatest, an African woman. He was one of the greatest women of all times. You go to the Nile Valley civilization, he has all these massive temples built in honor of the African supreme being, amen. Right? Hatshepsut was the greatest builder of all time. We've got other characters or queens like Amina of Zazwa. He's very present in northern Nigeria. He conquered and defeated so many kingdoms run by men and built walls that are known today. We've talked about Yas Antoine. There are other, great queens like Nzenga and Cleopatra, I Am the Nile, right? All these stories are there, and there are many more, right? In volume 2, you have fantastic queens like
Mute, me. Sorry, family, we seem to have lost our professor there. He will be back with us, I'm sure, in a very short while. I hope it isn't my internet that's playing up again. But wow, wow, wow. Hasn't he been doing some phenomenal works and some great research into our African kings and queens? I mean, he's just touching on the great kings and queens of Africa. But, as we have been learning over the Strongs by from Dr. Winters, we had African kings and queens in Europe, we had African kings and queens across the entire globe. Here we are to find out more from our brother Push about more the African kings and queens he's written
Sorry.
about. Shall I
Yeah.
bring up also, that great looking award-winning cartoon feature that you sent me? You sent me a PowerPoint presentation, and it had
Yes.
some wonderful illustrations, cartoon illustrations. Shall I bring that up for the family to see? Did you want
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
family to have
Yeah.
a look
Yes.
at
Yes.
that?
Yes, please.
Okay, fantastic. I'll share screen, and you can talk to it. Here we go, family. It should be coming up in a moment or two. All right, you seen that on screen?
Yes. That is, we have Hannibal. Um, I'm only contesting for glory and empire. And another famous quotation to inspire our kids is that when Hannibal was doing the impossible, at the end of the day, he said, "You either have to find a way or make one."
Mhm.
Those are some of the quotes or lessons that he leaves us. That if you can't find a way, you make your own way. Essentially, that is agency. Africans must find their agency.
Okay, my,
Yeah.
my computer's going really slow. Apologies, but we'll just go on to the next slide when it's stopped spinning. Here we
All right.
go.
Yeah, you have Menelik the second. Ethiopia prides themselves in the fact that when there was the Berlin Conference in 1884, the Europeans got together in organized crime and decided that, hey, we're going to Africa to take their resources and cut it up and take everything for ourselves.
Hmm.
Ethiopia resisted valiantly, and the famous Battle of Adwa, in which they crushed the Italians who had ambitions of colonizing Ethiopia. Um, at the Battle of Adwa, the lesson here was that Menelik, at that time, Ethiopia was still fractious. Had all these princes and other smaller kingdoms that were Abyssinia. That was contested. But Emperor Menelik II, was able, when faced with this threat of colonization and the invasion by Italy, he was able to convince all the small, over 100 of them, to come together as one force and then go into battle at Adwa. And they thoroughly crushed, the Italians, who ran and left all their arms behind. And, got all the Rasses to be together. Ras Mengesha, Ras Tolo, and all of them, they came together to crush the Italians. And one of them stood on the hill, and when the Italians were running, he was screaming, "Ebagume, Ebagume," means rip, rip. So they went and they ripped they ripped them. I mean, they literally slaughtered all of them, and they ran away. The Italians ran away to Italy, to Eritrea, but in Eritrea. But what is most important was the Empress Taitu Betul. He was the wife of Menelik, who literally told the Italians that they should never try. At that time, some of the tricks or lessons that we learn here is that at that time, um, Ethiopia had nice relations. They were trying to form good relations with the Italians, who had occupied what we now call Eritrea. But now the Italians came with what we call the Treaty of Wuchali, in which they said, "Oh no, we are friends. Let's sign this treaty." That would say that, "Oh no, we are friends." But in that treaty, it was written in Italian, and literally, Menelik, if he signed it, said that, "Look, we surrender the sovereignty of Ethiopia to Italy," right? Written in Italian. But the wisdom here was that, Menelik had an Amharic, the whole language version. right, in Amharic. And Ethiopia has a illustrious history, Giz and the writings, that dates long before Europeans knew how to write. So he had his Amharic version. So now then Italy now comes and say, we signed an agreement, we take over your foreign policy. And Menelik told them to go to hell, right? And that their version, the Amharic version, does not say that we are surrender our sovereignty. And that's what led to the war. What do we learn? That here we write our laws in English, right? We don't have our authentic language version of the laws that we write. So now when you get interpreters, then they come and tell you that this is what it means, right? But in South Africa, for example, when the Afrikaners were in power, they had the Afrikaans version of every law that they wrote, and then said that if in dispute, the Afrikaans version is superior. Those are lessons that Africans have not learned. If we go and sign big contracts with foreign powers, we must have our own language version. When there's a dispute, we call our language experts to come and tell you what the law says. So that's one big lesson that we learned from there. But what we said, Empress Title Betu led the cavalry. He led troops. The woman led troops into battle, right? He inspired and warned the Italians. The Italian, Antonicelli was the Italian Antonicelli, the ambassador, and actually fought in the battle and fought, with the men and won battles. Okay, so I'll leave it short there. Those are lessons that we learn. The lessons of unity. Why Africans, he was able to unite all of them, and that's how they won and were not colonized, right? Africans, to win, we must unite and go and speak with one voice and go into battle as one unit. And that's how we're going to win. Those are the lessons you learn from Menelik. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Powerful lesson indeed, my brother. And you see, hence why our history, our true history, is not being taught in the school, colleges, and universities to us, because therein lies the key to our potential success, unity. And we've got examples of that unity, and when it has been hugely beneficial for the continent of Africa, for whole of Ethiopia, and what is the line that we're often told? We can't unite, we don't know how to come together, never have done, never will. Hang on, you just told us about the story of Menelik and how he managed to pull together over 100 small nations. So we can come together. He did it, so it's back then, so it could certainly be done again. As you say, in the historical accounts that you have been sharing with us, there are just so many messages, so many important messages that we need to be aware of, that would actually help to advance us as a people if we were being taught about these things. So let's go to the chat, shall we, and ask the family to drop some questions in there. I mean, we've been getting lots of comments as you've been talking, and some of our audience may have some questions that they'd like to ask. So if that's okay with you, we'll bring in some of the audience. We'll get a bit of participation from the audience, yeah? Okay, all right, Shanice. Because it is being covered up as, right, okay, let's go up a bit. Right, what's this one from First Time? Welcome, First Time. He says, I'm always with you spiritually, sister. I've not been able to see your show. Yes, they can't keep me away. Why have you not been able to see my show? But anyway, glad you're here and you're tuned in right now. Hey, we've got a question. Let's jump to the question that says, do you agree that the white supremacists are in control of the most important aspects of African history that are needed to liberate Black people? Well, first of all, there's no such thing as white supremacists, as far as I'm concerned, not on this show anyway. There's no white supremacists on this show, because we're the supreme ones as Africans. Our history is testimony of how supreme we are as a people. So it's them whitewashing history into making us believe that they are more supreme, but they're not. But that aside, brilliant question. Over to you, Doctor, Push, what do you say? Do you
Yeah.
agree white
No.
terrorists are in control
I,
of
I,
most
I,
of the
yeah.
part of our history? Mhm.
Absolutely. I call it the myth of white supremacy.
I like
It's
that
just
one
a myth.
too. It
And
is
it's a
an
and it's a myth.
illusion, the myth.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
going
a
to make
myth.
a note of that. Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's a myth. And it's a myth as an ideology, because then their basic idea is domination and control, right?
Mm.
In South Africa, the Afrikaners, or what they call the Boers, we're not apologetic about it. They call it Baskap, meaning, I'm going to boss you, right? Baskap.
Mhm.
And then that's it. It's because, it's an ideology that you literally found, developed by, Western or white intellectuals who tried to raise themselves and pretended that Africans were inferior, right? And then discover that all that the systems and institutions they put in place, they simply just replicated them all around the world. So in the
Mhm.
United States, when you had all those Jim Crow laws and in Oklahoma, all the laws that they enacted even after the abolition of slavery, and people putting the indigenous people in reserves, all those things were simply just replicated in other places that they went. In Australia, in New Zealand, you put them in reserves, you make laws, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't have this kind of education, and all that. And it was replicated in South Africa. They started creating Bantustans, put them in reserves, and then you wrote all those apartheid laws. They were simply templates that they copied from the United States. You know, there's that funny story of a book that was written by a great African, historian, the origins of our discontent, right? And he says that at some point, even the Nazis, they went to the United States of America to go and study how they've been able to control blacks, right? And when those Nazi intellectuals came back, they reported to Hitler that, oh no, man, the Americans, they were too extreme. The methods were too extreme. So the what I'm trying to say that it's an ideology or a philosophy that they had developed in the service of that we're going to dominate. So it is true that this myth of white supremacy as a philosophy or as an ideology means that they must control everything. So they will impose language, they will impose their religion, they will impose everything. They will try and seize control of education system and indoctrinate you to say that we take credit for this and we brought this, we brought that, we brought that. And a lot of it are falsehoods also. And I'll give a quick example. Throughout school, people tell you, oh, Edison discovered the light bulb. Edison discovered the light bulb. But he discovered that is effectively not true. You know, Edison did not discover the light bulb. There were. I'll be quick about this one. There were several, other people who actually came up with the idea of incandescent lighting, but it was a black man called Louis Latimer, right, who at some point worked with Edison, who developed the carbon filament or the light bulb that we literally lighted up the whole world, right? Because Edison's so-called invention of the light bulb, his filament lasted a few seconds. So you cannot use it in homes or in factories or in schools or in street lighting. It was a black guy, but nobody has heard about Louis Latimer. The whites keeps on saying Edison discovered. He didn't. Other people brought that concept, and then they improved upon it. But it was Louis Latimer who lighted up the whole world, and he actually led the lightning in New York and street lighting in New York and London and Chicago and various places, and wrote the first book on incandescent lighting. You can still find it on Amazon. He wrote the first book on lighting. And Louis Latimer became the court expert on patents. He got several patents. So if there are dispute of patents, they call the black man, Louis Latimer, to come and give expert testimony. But all this history, nobody, hears about it. But Edison simply had a lot of money and he was supported by industry and he got people to work for him. And then at the end of the day, what he does is simply take their inventions as employees, right? So Edison did not discover the light bulb. And it was also Louis Latimer who drew he was a draftsman who drew the proofs that you take to get a patent of Alexander Graham Bell. who is alleged to have discovered the telephone. I mean, if you discover the telephone, you draw your own, blueprints. It was Latimer who did all that. It just basically to quickly illustrate that he rightly said, they would want to take a control of everything and take credit that does not belong to them, right? And that's why then it's important then to control our education system, write the books themselves, and then tell lies to our children, so that we don't even know about all our great achievements that will inspire us or that will motivate us to win the future. Yeah. And that's why we must take control of our own education systems and curriculum. Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Our sister in the chat asks that I post the names of your books. So here we are on screen, a list of the names of your books. Do you want to just maybe mention the titles or pull out a few titles to and mention them?
Yeah, precisely. Way back, we had the African Writers series. Everybody's familiar with them. They well, Chinua Achebe, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, all those things. But then that publishing house was Henneman, right? The, even though they did some good in bringing out the writings of great writers like African writers, Wole Soyinka and all those things. Obviously, their work was controlled by Henneman of London. So then we thought that, look, if we are writing our own history, we must also control the publishing, the ownership and publishing. So, well, as a starter, then we set about your 100 Great African Kings and Queens, which we have 80 more volumes to go, and then the whole idea was to expand it. So we had also the fiction aspects that are motivating Pan-African fiction stories, for adults and for children as well. So then we have Sea Never Dry, Toffee and the Rainbow Fish. All these are Pan-African unity stories, with a glorious outcome between CBD and the sea. So we have all of them as well, as nonfiction. All of them can be found on Amazon because it's the easiest and quickest way in which books can be accessed all over the world. So we did all those ones, and then futuristically, then we're looking at also chronicling great African scientists, great African women. Well, to some extent, we did it with the book 7 Amazing African Queens and Dynasties, Volume 1, in which we, we hope to, expand it to Volume 2 and Volume 3. I say, and then we have to write about great African entrepreneurs. I mean, there was one great African scientist like Louis Latimer. Those are all, stories that we have to tell, and several great African scientists that we don't talk about, and then great African entrepreneurs, great African leaders of the 20th century, right? You've got your Steve Bikos, you've got your Kwame Nkrumahs, and others. You've got your Nelson Mandelas and all those things. We have to chronicle them for our children, and not just biographical, but to take them through the struggle and the lessons that that we learn from them. So then somebody can come and say they'll tell us that, let's say, Mugabe was a bad guy, right? At the end of the day, we will write our own story and say, look, hey, Mugabe was not a bad guy, right? Look, he may have made some mistakes, but for the first 10 years, he was the best friend of the British, right? Because he allowed them access to the resources of Zimbabwe. And he actually sent troops to Matabeleland to protect British farms, because now the Indebelés were getting furious that, hey, we have independence, but where's the land, right? Mugabe actually fought on behalf of the British. Okay, so after 10 years, there's an agreement. And then he says, hey, what about our agreement, the Lancaster House agreement? You say you're going to pay for the land that will be given back to us, because that's what we fought for. That's what you hanged our heroes, and our heroines for. Then Tony Blair shot, clear shot, say, that was a long time ago. We don't know anything about this. So now when your war veterans get angry and then they put pressure on Mugabe, Mugabe had to do something. And then the land invasion. And then Mugabe, who was the best friend of the British, they gave him several degrees, several honorary PhDs, and then they knighted him and called him Sir Mugabe. The British will only knight you when you brought economic benefits to them, right? If you see any African who is a Sir, then it means he's literally helped them obtain African resources, right? They knighted him because that's what Sir Francis Drake, the pirate did. He sacked Spanish galleons and brought gold, to the Queen of England. And then after he stole a lot of gold, they brought the Queen of England. Then they called him Sir Francis Drake, right? So those are some of the history that we must know. And we must know that the first slave ship that was ever from the British, sanctioned by Queen Victoria, and Hawkins, was called the Good Ship Jesus, right? In 1555. It was called the Good Ship Jesus, right? Or Jesus of Lubeck. And they went and then they conned the Sierra Leoneans who were busy, going through their practices, and then conned them that there was some big Jesus in the ship. And when they got in, Captain Hawkins, the cousin of Queen Victoria, drove the slaves and went to sell them. So these are all stories that we must know. That we don't know. As a result, we can't interpret the present. That is where the gap is. We can't interpret the present because we don't know. We don't know any history. So effectively, yeah, that's what. Back to that portion. I'll just be quick with Mugabe. So Mugabe now, you want the land back, and now the person who's been knighted and given several this and now becomes a demon. Then you have all the Western press, they come in and start playing him as a demon, right? And that's how Mugabe then becomes demon. And then they impose sanctions and they say that targeted sanctions. But they literally want to cripple Zimbabwe, so that the people will rise up against him and he says, oh no, bring back the white man. And that's what they've been doing over the years. But if you know the history of this, then you know that now these people had no good intentions. All they want is your money, your resources, and your platinum and your gold and whatever. And if you don't play ball, then they bring in propaganda to come and portray you as a bad guy. But Mugabe was actually their best friend. He was even more of a best friend to the British than your Mandelis. But now when he says, give us back our land, then they turn him to a demon. So if you write a history, Mugabe is not a villain, So then if we do great African leaders of the 20th century, we will tell our own story as we like it. And we say Mugabe tried to restore the land and resources to the African people, but then they made him out to be a demon because somebody is telling your story. Yeah. Yeah. So that's how then we plan to go on writing. Great African entrepreneurs and all that.
Yeah, thank you. I have to put myself on mute. So thanks for the messages letting me know what's happening. Yeah, my computer is just racing. It's got about, I don't know, 20 or more pages opened at the bottom of my screen. So that could be why. So apologies for the interference from the noise. But we have been hearing some phenomenal stories from our brother, and I'm going to put the information, yes, back on the screen so that you can make notes of the books, and also obviously you can play back this video and just pause it and get the names of those books, which are available on Amazon. Yeah, so I've just been asked to put the books back up on the screen, so I'll do that for you all. And we are 5 minutes away from the top of the hour. Any final questions for our special guest today? We might have time for just one quick response to one quick question, maybe about a minute. So in the meantime, let me find that screenshot, that screen one again. Okay, here we go. I've got it. Let's just switch over to the Windows and share, see if it allows me to share. Yep. Let's share the presentation. So we're going to put our brother Push's books back up on the screen. Rise up, Sister Carol. Here we go. Alrighty, so you got the book titles that you can get from Amazon, and a bit of information, extra information there about the forthcoming books. So let me just remove those ones because you don't need those ones. But the other ones are the books that are currently available on Amazon. So make a note of those, family. As I said, you can always just stop the video to get that information. All right. Well. You have been busy, I must say, writing all those books. What have you got? What message have you got for young budding writers like myself, who is, I'm going to be launching my book on the 27th of November. Yeah, to those of you who joined late, I'm going to be launching my book on the 27th of November. And I would be honored, family in the audience, if you were to register and get a ticket, a Zoom ticket, which is free of charge. So register via Eventbrite to get a ticket to join me in the launch of my book on the 27th of November. You can actually get the book on Amazon as well. It's called A Black King of Anglo-Saxon England. And, sitting here under the multitude of books and stories that have been written by our brother Push, I've got a lot of writing to do and a long way to go. Brother Push, I don't know where you find the time, being a busy lawyer as well.
Yeah, because this is extremely important. These books and books like yours, fantastic books like yours, that are adapted or abridged for our children will be tremendous in transforming Black people and African people all over the world to take our rightful place as the head of the cornerstone, or the stone that the builders rejected, right?
Yeah.
Coming back to its rightful place. But it is, through efforts like yours, your shows and your books, and efforts, a united efforts by all other writers who I believe are also on your channel, that is going to make us win the future, right? And then beyond that, are also animations. I've done animation scripts of Mansa Musa and various others. I'm speaking to animators and movie scripts, other versions of the written text, for our children, so that we fumigate them from all the things, all the narratives that have mentally colonized us and as Africans. And then in a generation, Africa will be back on top. So then, to recap, the time to recapture our history as the driving force to victory is now.
Absolutely. Before you go, do you have a website where people can go to find out more information about your books, and maybe where they can just click a link and get to your books?
All right. As I mentioned, the books are available. If you go to Amazon and you search Push Coming or Real African Books, all the books are available, and it's available Barnes and Noble in print. You can get the hard copy or the e-books all over the world. It's also available in local bookshops in South Africa as well. Now, print, the era where you print 5,000 books and you try and distribute them are over, right? You put them on Amazon, you can get print, they'll print it and deliver to you, print on demand, e-books, and they actually also link with all other bookshops, who also source it from Amazon. So they're available there. But we also have a website by which you can download books that I've put there for $1. We have the UNESCO series all there, and some of my other books is Real African Books, realafricanbooks.co.za. You find them there. That's how passionate I am about Africa and its history. Yeah.
If you can give me that website again, it's Real African Books.
Yes, Real African. Yeah, realafricanbooks.co.za. Yes.
.ze. Okay. I've just
ZA. South Africa is ZA.
ZE.
A, as in
Oh,
apple. Yeah.
sorry.
Real
So,
realafricanbooks.co.z and A. That is A. As in,
ZA.
yeah,
Okay, my
ZA.
apologies.
As in
Yeah,
apple.
let's see
Yeah.
if I can delete that one. And sorry, hide that. Oops. ZA at the end, family. Okay,
Yeah.
so it's Real African Books.co.za.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. I've got that. So, family, for more information about the books that have been written by our brother Push, a phenomenal lineup of books there. Do go to his website or directly to Amazon, where you can order a copy of your book and have it delivered to you within a few days. And, we must congratulate you, Push, for the hard work that you've done. But absolutely agree with your sentiments about why African history is important and why we need to be writing our history ourselves for our children. And you recognize that that work needed to be done, and so you got up and did it. Kudos to you. And I hope that you've managed to inspire some of our listeners, some of our people in the audience, and maybe we've got a new budding author in the audience as a result of this presentation today, because it's a job that more of us need to be doing. So if there's a story inside of you to tell, please do tell and share that story. Get a couple of books. Kwanzaa is coming up. For some, Christmas is coming up. It's an opportunity to visit the Amazon bookstore and pull out some African history books, and check out mine as well while you're there. A Black King of Anglo-Saxon England, King Offa. Push, it's been an absolute privilege to have you on the platform to share. Oh, wow, give us an insight into the books and the stories within the books. We have all learned so much today about many African characters whom they've tried to whitewash out of our history. And I want to thank you for capturing those stories. Thank you for not allowing the names of those greats to die, because the names of those great heroes and sheroes of ours will only die when we stop talking about them. But for as long as we talk about them, and for as long as we're keeping their memory alive, they will live on, and our children will be inspired by them. So thank you all so much. So family, Real African Books. What do you say? Spell your name again. Okay, so they want your name. Let me just move this out the way, and we should be able to see your name on screen. So there's the name of the author. Thank you so much. My brother, thank you for your great
Thank you
work.
very much.
Keep up the great work. And
Thank you so much,
let's share in your journey and your success. Do join us again on this platform in the near future.
Looking forward to your book. Definitely tune in, because I know that it's going to be great. From your depth of knowledge. And also, I wish to thank all the people who took time to actually watch this show. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I hope we will continue the conversation of real African history, and that together we, all Africans and Blacks all over the world, are going to win the future.
Ashe, ashe, ashe. Thank you, everybody, for being for being locked into the Sister Shanice Show. Next strong, we have the return of Brother Jammers, who's going to be delivering a presentation that is going to give you the tools that you need to be able to tap into your inner great self. Yes, there's greatness inside of each and every one of us, and we're going spiritual next strong because you're going to come away with the knowledge of how to tap into your greatness. He's going to be joined as well by Brother Edison and myself and Dr. Abu. So keep it locked for next strong. Sister Shanice out of here for now. Thank you, family. Keep rising, each and every one of you. Keep doing the great work so you know needs to be done in order to elevate us as a people. If each and every one of us does a little, wow, 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 it's gonna result in a phenomenal contribution during these times. So thank you, family. I'm gonna leave it there for now. All being well, see you next strong. Bye for now. Bye for now, Push, and thank you again.
Okay,
Thank
bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye. End broadcast.